Hello, everybody. Good morning. Just waiting for people to stream into the stream. Hope you're doing well today. We had a few tech issues this morning, so time for you to say good morning to each other now, rather than 5 minutes before. Welcome, everybody. We also did some work on my sound because I understand there was quite a bit of white noise when things were quiet before, so hopefully that's better. You're welcome to tell me how it is. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so I shall start, bring us into practice together this morning. It's a beautiful day here. I hope it's good where you are. So my name's Milla, and I'm based in East London. I've been practicing Buddhist meditation and the Dharma since about 2005. And it's worth saying, actually, that as I live in a city, there may be some city noises during our session. I have neighbors, and there's a small person who lives just there who may make some noise. And also it's rubbish collection day on my street, so we may hear some other disturbances. But that feels in a way quite apt, given that my theme is about practice and life and practice in life. So maybe we can think of the bin lorry as something to practice with rather than something to practice against. And as I've said before, but just in case there are people joining for the first time this week, most of my work is with people and organizations working to shift systems towards social and climate justice. And so I think and experiment a lot around the ways that Dharma practice and this kind of work can intersect. They can support each other, and also how they can sort of become each other, and also how maybe there are elements that are missing from each, where they coming together, they can make a whole. So this week I see my role as really holding this space for us all to reflect and practice together, and perhaps plant some seeds or allow us to share ideas, opening some doors for each other as we go along. So exploring these themes of Dharma practice in our lives, particularly if we're involved in any work around change, suffering down, joy and justice up. And this can involve contemplating our embodiment, our relationships, the ways in which the systems and structures that we live in kind of create us, even as we create them, this dynamic, interdependent process, and how we're also intrinsically embedded in nature, part of the natural world. And this might include ideas of going against the stream, against the mainstream, in the ways we think and act and look at things. Yesterday we were talking quite a bit about imagination and whose imaginations we're living in. And today I'm going to expand on that a bit more and also reflect on the idea of ancestors. In different ways. So a few words before we get into some practice. On the wall, just outside this room, in this house, we have a mural of a forest. And within that forest, there are lots of people. And these are images of our ancestors, myself and my partner. And this is inspired by the Plum Village tradition of touching the earth, where we pay respect to three kinds of ancestors. There's family ancestors, what they call blood ancestors, but we could think of them as family of origin or group care in our early lives. Then there's spiritual ancestors, teachers and people who've inspired us, so on. And then land ancestors who've made the place where we live worthwhile. And I think we can split this land ancestors further into kind of physical infrastructure and also ideas. And then the American teacher Lama Rod Owens also has a practice which is related, called the Seven Homecomings, which is about paying respect and drawing nourishment from 7 groups of ancestors, including the earth and including oneself. So I'll draw on both of these ideas. Okay. I've noticed the sounds in the chat, people are saying the sound's a bit weird. Hopefully it's okay. We can maybe talk about that afterwards. Okay, so feel free to get yourself ready for practice. Make any movements you like, any stretches, yawns, big breaths, settlings for meditation. My sharing practice is invitational. So you can choose whether or not to follow any of my suggestions. And always listen to yourself and listen to your body and do what's right for you. Okay, so settling into your position that you're going to take for the next, half hour or so. Whether you're sitting or standing or lying down. Finding a way to be settled, relatively still. Finding a position that is both awake and relaxed, alert and without tension. That's possible for you today. Starting to check in with sensations in your body, perhaps where your body is meeting the ground. Maybe taking a couple of slightly deeper than usual breaths. On the in-breath, growing longer in your spine, at the back of your body, and the out-breath softening the front of your body. Allowing your awareness to diffuse your physical experience, perhaps one particular part, maybe your breathing, maybe your hands, maybe the sensation of resting on the earth. And practice with contact with embodied experience for a few minutes. So next I'll invite some other contemplations or anchors. And you're welcome to take up these invitations or to maintain your steady embodied attention on your physical experience. But whichever you choose to do, see if you can access or enable the same kind of steady, caring attention, whether the focus is the sensations of your body or the contemplations. The quality of awareness being somewhat consistent. So starting now with some ancestor contemplation, starting with spiritual ancestors, those whose teachings or insight have enabled your progress on the path. Bringing to mind one or more of your spiritual ancestors on whose path you walk, in whose imagination maybe you spend some time. If they've been helpful to you, bringing them to mind, allowing them to be near you. This could be in a general sense, or if you like, you can visualize them coming near you, sitting down with you, and sharing a sense of appreciation for each other in the practice. So, appreciation and connection with our spiritual ancestors. And then moving on to our family or blood or care ancestors. And particularly those whose bodies we came from. They may or may not have been the same people who raised you. The people who enabled us to exist, and the people who enabled them to exist, and their parents, going right back to the beginning of the human story. The physical links with our past, with our ancestors, many of whom will be shared. And back further to other shared ancestors, millions of years ago, with the other great apes and the mammals, and right back to the single-celled creatures that are the shared ancestors of all life. Our blood ancestors going back to the dawn of life on Earth. We exist because they did. And we are part of the same story. And if you like, bringing one or more of these ancestors, whether within living memory or beyond, into your visualization, into your circle, or into your sense of closeness. Our family or blood ancestors. And now our land ancestors, people who have made the physical fabric of the world that sustains you, built your home, the place you live, installed the water, the sewage systems, farms, food systems, transport infrastructure that enables you to make your everyday choices. The people who planned the rubbish collection, which I can hear behind me whether or not you can. We may not know their names, but we can acknowledge that their work has helped us to live, whether it was willing or unwilling work, offering them gratitude for their labour and bringing them into this circle of appreciation for our ability to live and practice. Our land ancestors. And next, our ideas ancestors, the people who dreamed us into being, who dreamed the ways we get to choose to live into being, the people whose work, conversations, and struggles created the social world, the thought world, in which our own thought worlds are possible. The people who've created the ground in which we can flourish. Some may have shared ideas that inspire you or gave you a path on which to walk. Bringing them to mind, into our circle. Sharing appreciation for one another. So now we have spiritual ancestors, blood ancestors, land and ideas ancestors in our circle. And we'll add one more, the earth, our ultimate shared ancestor, bringing the earth into the circle with gratitude, support for our practice and our lives now and in the future. Appreciating the earth and seeing the earth's appreciation for you mirrored back as part of themselves, joining the circle. And broadening your view to take them all in now, all together. Supporting one another with kindness and appreciation. And we'll practice like this for the rest of this quiet time. And if it's enough for you already, at any point return to your embodied experience. We practice here as a Sangha in community, and each of us has a Sangha of ancestors, bringing them together, a mass of intersecting communities, going back in time and out across the whole world. The writer Grace Lee Boggs has said that building community is to the social as spirituality is to the individual. And Thich Nhat Hanh had a contemplation that the next Buddha might be the Sangha. So it's good to take care of our community, to acknowledge our communities of communities, our shared individual ancestries, ideas, practice, support. Thank you for being here as part of this, our shared Sanghas, co-creating the worlds, the imaginaries for each other and the people in the future. And now coming back together and making any stretches or movements you like. Coming back to the room you're in. I'll share some thoughts and you're welcome to put any comments or questions in the chat. I'll look at them afterwards. And as usual, if you would like to ask a question, please put the word question in capitals at the beginning. So back in November 2021, I was in Liverpool in the northwest of England, and I was lying down and having a rest in a bank in a branch of HSBC in a group of other people. We were taking a moment to get in the way. This was an action with a group that I'm part of called the Stop Shopping Choir, and we were doing a tour as a part of a series of actions leading up to COP26 in Glasgow. And after we'd rested a while, we began to speak and to sing, sharing our thoughts and feelings about the work of the bank and its investments in fossil fuel companies that are making our future unsafe or impossible. And some people spoke about the bank's billions of pounds of investment and related it to specific struggles and environmental damage in places like Nigeria. And after we'd been there for about half an hour, we left and we went and formed a circle to do a debrief, as is usual after these things. And to be honest, I felt pretty weird about it. I'm not sure it was the best thing for us to do or even the best target. I'm not recommending sleeping in a bank branch as a great way to spend your time. But I thought it's an interesting example of how what we do has a history. We're living and acting within this web of ideas. The idea from Buddhism of dependent origination, that everything comes from everything else and is connected. It's a web not unlike the web of Dharma ancestors. So one of the ideas ancestors for all of this, for me, is a strange but rather wonderful French thinker called Guy Debord. And he was part of the Situationist International. Themselves a strange and highly diverse bunch, always falling out with each other. And I was given a copy of Debord's book, The Society of the Spectacle, which was written in 1967. And he wrote that our society was becoming a society of the spectacle, where advertising and consumption makes a kind of layer on top of real experience. And so we're kind of amused and quite passive in a sort of happy, shallow trance. And we also have very limited choices in this trance, like whether to buy the red thing or the blue thing. And the only action we can take is to consume, to interact within this rather narrow frame. And we're so busy being amused, we're so kind of bombarded by sensation that it's hard to think outside it, or even to question whether we want to be part of it. Makes me think of the experience of going around Oxford Street, in and out of shops like Selfridges. It's so busy and colourful and noisy, amazing smells and beautiful design, and it's all there to kind of make us want, while soothing us that wanting and buying will make us happy. It's so counter to the Dharma, and these are values that we kind of swim in just by being in those spaces. And they're also exhausting, but if we exhaust our energy in these ways, it's kind of less space to think, less energy to think. Is this spectacle for me? Is it for my well-being? Is it meeting my needs, my neighbor's needs? Do I like these values? It's noisy, hard to think, like being trapped in a fun fair or glued to Instagram. That's another experience I relate to this. We're so entranced by imagery that we forget that the images aren't reality, like in the film The Matrix. And Guy Debord's answer to this was partly to write his polemic text, pointing out these issues with lots of clarity and passion. But he also recommended intervening by creating situations, and that's where the name Situationist International comes from, where real life can burst through the facade of the spectacle. And the idea is that by giving people real experience of a real interaction that maybe is counter to the consumer trance, these emotions will help them also see outside it for a moment, interrupting that matrix, a moment of unmediated experience, not the one that's been designed by the shop or the advertisers or whatever. And I really relate this to what can happen in moments of meditation, or in the practice of coming back to embodied experience and closeness to raw physical sensation, ever more unmediated by our ideas or our narratives, our senses of self. And so these kinds of situations are pretty fun to play with as ideas. And that's, I think, what we were doing in the bank branch when we laid down apparently to sleep and then started speaking and singing. This was not a normal thing to happen in a bank branch. And people did have really strong emotional responses. They were not particularly happy emotional responses necessarily. But there was also a lot of curiosity. And earlier this year, the choir also went to Whole Foods in Piccadilly Circus, where we did some singing, and then we held an open meeting about the implications of Amazon, the company Amazon, which owns Whole Foods, the implications of their ownership. And this was a meeting that anyone could join. We felt that having a meeting was in many ways counter to the consumer trance. And one person who stopped joined us and seemed to be quite moved. Others were annoyed or ignored us. It was a mix. And so we also have kind of ancestors of ideas of actions. I think Yoko Ono and John Lennon were creating a situation when they staged their bed-ins. And the anti-roads protesters in the 90s in the UK had raves on the North Circular in London to protest the expansion of the road network. And one of the things they did was they had performers on stilts, really, really high stilts with these giant dresses that went all the way to the ground. And they all came into the road and stopped the traffic, and they had really loud techno music going. And part of the reason for the music was to have a party, to have a festival, to interrupt the trance of the road with a real human happening. But also underneath the dresses were people with pneumatic drills, digging up the tarmac and planting trees. And so when the performers moved on, there was a little forest on A406. And I think that the same people were then involved in the climate camps, the Occupy movement, and then coming to 2019, the big Extinction rebellions, doing very much the same thing in Oxford Circus with Pink Boat, parties, well-being tents, glue. And I think maybe some of you were there. And then in the media space, subvertisers, people who manipulate and change advertising, like Brandalism or Adbusters, they create satire out of the very messaging medium that creates the spectacle, in Debord's words. And the yes men, they prank the news. A few years ago, posing as an executive from Dow Chemicals, apologizing for the Bhopal disaster and offering a 12 billion compensation fund, which caused the share price to plummet before they realized that this guy wasn't actually from the company. And coming up in November, there's Black Friday, the biggest shopping day of the year, but also called Buy Nothing Day. And anyone can participate by buying nothing, interrupting their consumer trance. And I spoke yesterday about the Bodhisattva Manjushri with his flaming sword cutting through fetters of delusion or self-illusion or unhelpful ideas, trances, perhaps. And I think all of these people are emanations of the Bodhisattva Manjushri, our action, our activist ancestors, making us feel less alone, less like the mad ones going against the stream, less weird like me coming out of that action in the bank branch thinking, what were we doing? What was the point of that? All of them, like the Buddha, pointing out that hot coal in our hands and the hands of our fellow citizens and neighbors, that we could just drop it. All working for less suffering, more joy, more justice. So I welcome your questions. And I didn't say at the beginning about Dana, so I'll tuck it in here while perhaps questions might come through. That what supports this platform and this practice, and feel free to give. But I will now take a look at questions, and thank you for listening. So maybe I'll say one more thing, and and then we can sit quietly together, whether or not questions come. The idea that this is the idea of contemplating our ancestors as expressions of dependent origination, I think. Perhaps I already made that point. That all things, and that includes ourselves and our ideas and the things we do, are made from the things that came before. This notion of looking at history, the real embodied history of our lives, as expressing that dharmic truth, I find that very rich. And I find that something that can be very comforting as well. Comforting and inspiring, especially when you feel lost or that the work you do is pointless in the grand scheme of things because you're just one person. Okay, so we have a question. Thank you, Victoria. And of course, you're also welcome to come on screen if you want to raise your hand and be brave and show everybody your morning face if it's the morning for you. You're welcome to do that. We can have a conversation. All right, so Victoria says, how might you suggest a way of appeasing people peacefully who react aggressively to an action protesting the use of fossil fuels? There's lots of answers to this, and lots of different ideas, actually, different ways to do this. I think my first response is that I wouldn't really worry about appeasing them, apart from to keep yourself safe. Recent research has shown that when people become very angry or very annoyed at an action, like people disrupting a road or getting in the way, this idea in direct actions we have of wanting to get in the way, when that becomes annoying for people, they are actually much more likely to get curious and change their minds, potentially. And certainly the anger and friction that these kinds of things can engender is very compelling for others when they see it reported for lots and lots of different reasons. And a protest or an action that generates friction and aggression is much more effective in many situations than a peaceful protest. And so as someone, I don't know, Victoria, if you're involved in any of this, but as someone, taking an action, it's actually a success. Very difficult and tricky in the moment. But if zoom out to the bigger picture, potentially very, very effective. So I would say, apart from keeping yourself safe, which might just be simply getting out of the way of, an immediate, like someone pushing or shouting, if you want to get out of the way of that, to keep yourself safe. But in terms of appeasing them, I'm not sure that that's necessary. And that's where practice, again, potentially is a resource. Yeah. Another answer is to share why you're doing it, but from a very deep place. To share your own sense of vulnerability and that you feel you have no option. I mean, I'm not trying to tell you what to say, to tell anyone what to say, but these are things that I have seen to be sometimes helpful, depending on the person and depending on the type of aggression. But yeah, I mean, the suffragettes are a really great example here. The suffragettes we learn about in school were, and who, like, everyone looks up to and they have special days for in Parliament and so on. They're the suffragettes who marched and, chained themselves to a railing and, worst of all, threw themselves in front of the king's horse. But then, the suffragettes also took meat cleavers to artwork. They did property damage. They were very much in the direct action kind of ancestry, which gets kind of airbrushed out. And maybe, we don't know, but some theories of activism would suggest that it's because of the more radical acts that the more moderate activists are allowed to the table and to make the change. So I would say it's all part of the same picture, rich picture. That's my infinite wisdom on aggression in a protest. Any more today. Would I recommend reading anything? I will think about that and post. That's a good question. Oh, I can say one more thing actually with regards to these kinds of questions. One question which came yesterday was about how to notice if the kind of if individualism is coming into your meditation practice. How to watch out for that. If you're using meditation to kind of become a better self as opposed to trouble the notion of a self, which I think is a very easy kind of thing to slip into. And I wanted to share that the work, and also how like capitalist ideas can come into meditation quite easily. And one great book about this is called Mindfulness, which is by Ronald Purser. And it talks exactly about that, about meditation and mindfulness in global North culture and how it can actually be very aligned with these problematic values. And then the same person, Ronald Purser, he has a fantastic podcast called The Mindful Cranks. And in that, he interviews all kinds of different thinkers. And that's also really good for finding ideas, ancestors, and building your frame of reference. But at this point, we've hit the hour, and I thank everybody again for their presence here and their practice and their good work in the world. And see you maybe tomorrow or Friday.